$5,000 and couples earning less than $50,000 would pay no tax. Many already don't. But the wealthiest Americans would see their tax rate slashed to 25% from nearly 40%. Trump's plan also eliminates the estate tax paid by the wealthiest Americans. Meantime, the corporate tax rate would be cut to 15%. But how to pay for all of that is not clear. Trump promises to get rid of unspecified deductions and close tax loopholes now available to special interests and the very wealthy. He says critics who charge that the numbers don't add up are wrong.
They're wrong because we're bringing in at least $2.5 trillion is stuck outside of this country. And that money now will be able to flow back in under my plan. That money will be able to flow back into the country. We're going to be reducing corporate taxes. Jobs will be created. The economy is going to expand tremendously like it hasn't since Reagan, but probably even before that. This will be a rocket ship for the economy.
Let me bring in our political panel for us. Martin Sullivan, chief economist for the nonpartisan group Tax and formerly worked for the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. Matt Schlapp is a Republican strategist and former White House political director for George W. Bush when he was president. Let me bring you in, Martin, on this. You've said that the Trump plan is not realistic on the revenue side. Still no specifics on the deductions and the loopholes he would close here. So are we really getting a specific plan from Donald Trump, as some have called it, when there are no specifics?
Well, Tamron, you know, presidential tax plans are like preseason football. They give you a clue as to what's going on, but they don't really count. All of these presidential plans are unrealistic, but I think Mr. Trump's plan is especially unrealistic. We can compare it to what Mr. Romney did in 2012. We can compare it to what Jeb Bush proposed a few weeks ago. And this plan is much more generous and very unlikely to be revenue neutral.
When Trump says that people are wrong, that they would be bringing in at least $2.5 trillion in money that's stuck outside of this country, does that make any sense to you?
I'm afraid it doesn't, because when you do the math, when you bring in that $2.5 trillion, for example, the most that would raise would be $250 billion, which is a lot of money, of course. However, Mr. Trump has other aspects of his plans which are extremely generous. For example, he would reduce the corporate rate from 35% to 15%. And when you do that, just in 1 year, that would more than offset the extra revenue that he would get from that repatriation provision. So, yes, we would get money from the component that he is emphasizing, but his rate cuts are just so far off the charts that in terms of revenue that it's unrealistic to think that this could be a net revenue raiser.
Matt, billionaire investor Carl Icahn has endorsed Trump, and he also says that Trump is looking out for the little guy. You might recall Trump had said that Icahn would be his Treasury Secretary if he were elected. Also, you have Grover Norquist giving his blessing. Of course, he's the architect of the anti-tax movement, major player on your side of the aisle for Republicans.
Yes.
What's your take? Do you give Trump a thumbs up, thumbs down on his plan?
Well, I think the plan is in the right direction. I think it's unfair to say it's going to cost all this money when he has said it's going to be revenue neutral. As a conservative, I actually wish it wouldn't be revenue neutral. I'd really like to see us not worry so much about the revenue side of tax cuts. And here's what we don't know, Tamara, and you brought this up in the beginning, which is you got to look at two sides of the equation. It's not just what the rates are, it's what's going to happen to the deductions. And so what you really want to know is what your effective tax rate is, whether it goes up or whether it goes down. Yes, these rates look like they're going to go very low, but if you lose all your deductions, it could not come out in the wash in the way you want it to. So, you know, yeah, I think I agree that there's a lot of details to be learned on the plan.
Well, I mean, but this was a big part of this announcement yesterday was that finally we would hear some details from Trump about a policy. When you talk to him about Syria, for example, he kind of says, let them fight it out, and then we pick up the remnants if you want to consider that a specific policy on this. But with
this is pretty fair.
You believe it is?
Yeah, look, let's give him his due. I mean, this is a reasonable tax plan. This is about as much detail as you get when someone's running for president. And we know that it's very clear that if Donald Trump gets the nomination and is elected president, he is going to take bold steps to make sure that we no longer have the highest corporate tax rate, or one of the highest corporate tax rates in the country. And by the way, our rate on small business people is even higher than the rate corporations pay. So we definitely need to bring these rates down if we're going to be competitive internationally.
Martin, I'll let you get in, but I do want to ask Matt, the Tax Foundation, which lower tax rate, says that the cost of Trump's cuts could easily total more than $7 trillion over the next decade.
Depends on what depends on what happens to the deductions.
I'm glad Matt brought up the question of the deductions. We're not flying blind here. Ever since Bowles and Simpson made the big push for tax reform in 2010, we've been studying all different types of tax plans, and we have a pretty good idea of what are the possibilities on deductions. Mr. Trump has taken the charitable deduction and the mortgage interest deduction off of the table. So there really are not, once you take those off the table, there really aren't a lot of deductions and tax breaks left to make up the difference. In fact, even for the Romney plan, which was much less generous, it was very, very difficult to get the rate down to 28%. And then on the corporate side, we have things like the research and development tax credit. We have tax incentives for investment. Do we really want to get rid of those to pay for a 15% rate? So you're right, Mr. Trump has not given us the details, but we really can't give him the benefit of the doubt because we know what the likely candidates are, and we know
there's nothing
that it's not
wrong
possible
with cutting rates so low that we actually spur economic growth again. It's what Obama's struggling with. We have a stagnant economy, and it means we don't have job growth. And if you haven't seen your wages increase, that's why.
We have stagnant wages. We definitely need to cut our tax rates. But large tax cuts that are unfunded will have a detrimental effect on the economy, not a positive effect.
Right. Well,
Come on.
Matt and
actually,
Martin, Matt and Martin, thank you both for your time. I greatly appreciate it. I've got